It was an ordinary afternoon at the mall when the scene unfolded, a white cop, standing firm and imposing, detaining an elderly black woman near the food court. The woman, clearly shaken, tried to explain herself, but the officer wasn't listening. Passers-by whispered, unsure of what was happening. Was she accused of something? The officer's actions seemed harsh, and it didn't make sense. The woman, dignified despite the circumstances, tried to remain calm, but it was obvious she was being treated differently. The crowd grew uneasy, sensing something was off, but no one dared step in. Some glanced at their phones, others looked away, as if hoping the situation would just blow over. But it didn't. The officer's grip tightened. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, a voice cut through the air. "Let her go." A tall man approached the scene, his presence immediately commanding attention. As he got closer, the officer's face went pale. The crowd shifted in confusion. Who was this man? Why did his mere presence make the officer recoil? With every step he took toward them, the elderly woman's face changed. She no longer seemed like just any old woman in distress. Who was she really? The cop looked like he had seen a ghost. Stay tuned to find out how this moment will change everything for both of them. The man who had stepped in wasn't just any passerby. He was Marcus Lawson, a well-known attorney who had been practicing law for nearly 2 decades. But it wasn't his professional reputation that caused the officer's face to drain of color. It was the name he carried, the same name that had once brought the officer's career to its knees years ago. Marcus had grown up in a small neighborhood, one that had been notorious for violence and crime, but he had managed to rise above it. What most people didn't know was that Marcus' mother, the woman still sitting on the bench, had been a part of a far more influential circle, a circle that the officer had once tried to target unsuccessfully. As Marcus approached, his eyes locked with the officer's. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken history. The elderly woman, whose name was Evelyn Lawson, seemed to recognize the shift in energy. She sighed softly, her hands trembling as she gripped her purse tighter. There had been a time when she wouldn't have stood out in a crowd. Now, all eyes were on her, and the tension was unbearable. She had spent her life staying out of the limelight, quietly supporting her son from the shadows. But today, everything had changed. The officer didn't dare say a word. Instead, he stepped back, glancing nervously at the growing crowd. There was something unsettling about the whole scene, something more than just the wrongful detainment of an elderly woman. Why had this situation spiraled so quickly? And why had Marcus, with all his success, come back home now of all times? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the shadows of the past loomed over them all. The officer stood frozen, his eyes darting between Marcus and Evelyn, struggling to form words. The crowd around them had grown, whispering, murmuring, unsure of what was really going on. Some had begun filming, their phones raised high, but no one seemed to dare intervene. The silence was suffocating, like a pressure cooker about to explode. Marcus' eyes remained locked on the officer, his jaw tight, and for a moment he didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence was enough to send a message that no one could ignore. But Evelyn seemed lost in her own world, her mind drifting to places she hadn't visited in years. She remembered the days when she and her husband had been pillars in their community, when they were untouchable in ways that few could ever understand. Those were the days when Marcus was just a boy, playing in the yard while she looked over her shoulder, always aware of the whispers around her. The whispers that hinted at things she didn't fully understand, things tied to people she had once called friends. She had kept her distance from the underworld her husband was involved in, but there had been moments, small moments, when she'd wondered if she could have done more to protect him, or perhaps to protect Marcus from the legacy of their name. It wasn't just a family name anymore. It was a mark, a target, and that officer, he knew it. She could see it in his eyes. "I don't want any trouble," the officer finally muttered, his voice barely audible, but his tone was more like a plea than an assertion of authority. Marcus' lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. "You're already in it, my friend," he said, his voice low but laced with venom. The words hung in the air, sharp and unsettling. Across the scene, a woman in the crowd watched with growing interest. She wasn't just anyone. She was a journalist, always looking for her next big story. Her name was Sarah Williams, and she had been following Marcus for months, intrigued by his sudden re-emergence into the public eye. The whispers around his name had become louder, and there were rumors of a dark family secret that could unravel everything he had built. She hadn't been able to find any concrete evidence, but she felt something stirring beneath the surface. She had a gut feeling that today, in this crowded mall, something big was about to be uncovered. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't move. She didn't dare take her eyes off Marcus and the cop. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where the mask would slip, and the truth would be revealed. But what truth? And whose truth? Meanwhile, Evelyn sat still, the events unfolding around her like a distant dream. Her son was speaking, her past was crushing back into the present, and all she wanted was peace. But peace had long since abandoned her, and now she had to face whatever was coming next. There was more to this confrontation than a simple case of wrongful detainment. She knew it, Marcus knew it, and even the officer knew it. But none of them knew just how deep the rabbit hole went. The tension in the air grew thicker by the second. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, unwavering, but the officer shifted uncomfortably, his fingers twitching at his side as if reaching for something that wasn't there. He glanced at Evelyn, then back at Marcus, like a man caught between two worlds. There was something deeply unsettling about this moment, a strange and powerful energy that neither of them could escape. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, sensing the drama unfolding, but no one dared move closer. Marcus broke the silence with a single cutting remark. "You don't get to walk away from this, not this time." Evelyn winced slightly at her son's words, but she didn't speak. She knew too well that once Marcus went down this road, there was no turning back. She had seen it before years ago, when her family had been dragged into the center of a dangerous game that no one truly understood. She had told herself that it was over, that Marcus had moved on, that they were free from the past. But now, standing here in this mall, she realized how wrong she had been. The officer took a shaky step back, as if realizing the depth of the mistake he'd just made. His eyes flicked nervously to the crowd, but no one was giving him any help. The people around them were waiting, watching, their phones still raised. No one seemed to care that he was a cop. All that mattered was what was happening right in front of them. Suddenly, there was a sharp voice from behind. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned to see another man, dressed in a suit, approaching swiftly. He was tall, his face familiar to Marcus, though not someone he had seen in years. It was Officer Granger, a former partner of the officer now standing before him. But unlike the man in front of Marcus, Granger's presence wasn't filled with uncertainty. His eyes were cold, calculating, and just as soon as he laid eyes on Evelyn, a flicker of recognition passed across his face. It was the same look the officer had given her earlier, the same look that screamed of secrets long buried. Marcus tensed, his body coiling like a spring. Granger's arrival was not a coincidence. It couldn't be. There was something deeper here, something no one had anticipated, and it was about to come to light in the most explosive way. The crowd sensed it too, as the two officers exchanged a brief but loaded glance. Evelyn's heart thudded in her chest. She could feel the walls closing in. Every choice she had made, every secret she had buried for her family's sake, seemed to come crushing down in that single pivotal moment. "What do you want, Granger?" Marcus' voice was low but deadly, filled with a quiet fury that only those who knew him well could fully understand. Granger didn't answer immediately. He looked at Marcus, then at Evelyn, his eyes narrowing. The air seemed to freeze. "I think it's time we talk, Marcus," Granger said finally, his voice smooth but heavy with implication. "And I think your mother needs to hear this too." Evelyn's blood ran cold. She knew, deep down, that whatever Granger was about to say was the final key to everything, the thing that had been haunting them all these years. But did she really want to know? Would knowing change anything? Or was it just too late? For the briefest moment, everything seemed to stop. Time itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. The crowd, the officers, Marcus, Evelyn, everyone was on the edge of something. And then, just as the suspense reached its peak, Granger's phone buzzed, breaking the tension with a sharp jolt.